Good evening, this is Woodblock Printmaker Dave Bull, speaking to you from my usual seat here behind my carving bench in our shop in Asakusa, Tokyo. This video is another in our David's Choice series, where we take a look at interesting items from my collection of woodblock prints and related things. As you have just seen in the cold open, we are back in the world of printed books again this time around. I think this is the third time in this series that I've chosen books to look at. I hope you're not getting tired of that because there are lots more where these came from. Anyway, let's get to it. Before we look more closely at these little books, I want to introduce the man who made them. When I say made, I don't mean the actual, writing the text of the books, drawing pictures, or doing any carving and printing, anything like that. I mean this, of course, in the sense of being the producer, the man who had the vision of what could be possible, and who then set about assembling the resources to make it happen. This was Takejiro Hasegawa, and his working career aligned almost exactly with the Meiji era, that time in Japanese history when the long isolation had come to an end and the country was rapidly modernizing. He was born into a family that was running a large-scale import business, bringing food and wine from overseas. In his teens, I think to help with the family business, he was sent to a mission school to learn English, and he was apparently soon earning money guiding visitors around Tokyo. But as he got older, he became aware that the family business was destined to be passed down to his older brother. And I guess he was a kind of entrepreneurial type, so he started his own activities. And by the time he was 30, he had built a thriving business importing textbooks from England and America. At some point, he had the idea to try his hand at publishing such books instead of just importing them. It was an idea that would change his life. Among his first publications was this. It was what we now know as the Japanese fairy tale series. This was a series of small books that retold Japanese folk tales in foreign languages. Initially planned to be marketed to Japanese people who wanted to learn those languages, the focus soon changed. It turned out that such books were of much greater interest to foreigners who wanted to learn about Japanese culture. Now, he published them first in English, but then subsequently in French, and then also in German, with some small number of titles also appearing in, I should have prepared a list. There's Spanish and Portuguese. There's two that begin with a D. Dutch and Danish. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I should have looked more carefully. One was even in Russian. Now, these books told the old stories in a very compact form. It's usually about 20 pages in length, each story accompanied by illustrations. Now, the translations and the original English versions came from members of the foreign community in Japan. And the images, these were created by designers he hired from the field of magazine illustration. We see some of the same names in these books as we do on the kuchie, those woodblock prints that were inserted into the front of magazines. Suzuki Kason, Kobayashi Eitaku, names like this. The books were a kind of mixed media production. The illustrations were created by traditional methods, being carved and printed from woodblocks, but the text portions were printed from movable type in a press. Now, that actually made it fairly easy to produce the books in various languages. The woodblock side of the work was done in one workshop, leaving the open spaces. So, the open spaces around here, and the sheets were then sent out to a commercial printing outfit for the stories to be printed in whichever language was needed. But there's something else about these books, another aspect of them, that makes the actual content, the story and illustrations, seem almost irrelevant. As I said, they were carved on wood blocks and then printed, just like the old Japanese novels that I showed you in a previous video. But when we look closely at the folktale books, we can see immediately that these are different. It seems as though they are printed on fabric. Look at the texture, all wrinkled, and the pages, all soft and floppy. Surely this is cloth. But no, this is paper, normal Japanese printing paper. As I said, the carving and printing was done in the normal fashion, and the story text was then added. But then once the printing of each sheet was done, it was put through a process that turned it into what we now usually call crepe paper. Now, Hasegawa-san didn't invent that process, known as chirimen. It had been known for a very, very long time. Here we are. Look at this. Look at these two woodblock prints. These are from the early 1800s, 1810 or so, I think. They're from a series of kabuki actors by Kunisada. They started out at the same size. They were both large, like this one, and they were both carved and printed in the normal way. But once they were finished, this one was then creped. It was squeezed in such a way that gave it a fabric-like texture and at the same time shrunk it down to the smaller size. Now we see the same thing in the manufacture of chiogami, Japanese pattern papers used for crafting, such things as pasting on boxes or making clothing for paper dolls. Many chiogami sheets, the ones I have here, are all woodblock printed. They were sold in the normal flat format, but it was also common for them to be made available in this textured creped style. And again, as before, making it into a creped style actually made it into a smaller size. A doll made with cloth like this would make it look much, much, much more realistic. So anyway, that's the process. Creped Japanese paper in single sheets or woodblock prints or book pages. But how was it made? Now, in the case of most of the crafts and processes from the old days, we don't have any actual record of how things were done. There was simply no reason for workers to document what they were doing. And in most cases, craftsmen wouldn't have wanted other workshops to learn their methods. But for some crafts, oh my God, this is heavy. I'm probably going to knock the whole thing all over here. Let's try it. For some crafts, we have a few simple illustrations left behind, as in this old book of woodblock prints that shows various tradesmen at work. This, I think, is an armor making workshop. I didn't key this. What are they doing here? Oh, they're making fans. Yes, I don't have my glasses on, I can't see that. Anyway, but there's very little technical information we can get from such pictures. Now, in the case of our crepe paper, we don't even have such a simple thing as this, but we do have some documentation. And it comes to us from a very interesting source, the Emperor of Prussia. I have here some photocopied pages from a very fat printed account of travel and research undertaken in Japan at the behest of the Prussian government. This was published in 1886 by one J.J. Rhein, who was a professor of geography at the University of Bonn. Now, of course, published by the Prussian government, it's in German. This would be a very long slog for me, and I guess we wouldn't need to get some help to translate it. That's not necessary, because 3 years later, in 1889, an English version of the book was published. I'll need my glasses for this. And there, almost in passing, on page 410, is this phrase. The mechanism and processes already mentioned have been described and illustrated by Herr von Brandt in the 5th book of the German East Asiatic Society, just as we observed them together in several workshops. The process was described and illustrated in the 5th book. Anyway, so I thought it might not be a bad idea to ask Google. Who knows, perhaps I could find a lead to something. Well, not only did I find a lead, it turns out that the German East Asiatic Society, founded in 1873 by German diplomats, scholars, and merchants here in Japan, is still in existence. And they have a library. I contacted them, and Ms. Roder there, she was extremely helpful. She dug through the shelves looking for the reference, and she found the exact volume that had been referenced in that old book. And of course, she immediately copied it for me. And here in these 3 documents, we have a really extensive description of the process used for making the paper in these beautiful little books. In essence, it was this. The woodblock printing was completed in the normal fashion, carving and printing. We know how to do that part. Now, a number of the completed prints were then moistened and stacked. They were stacked in alternation between special stiff sheets that were formed in a kind of a corrugated pattern. Now, that stack, paper and corrugated sheets, was then rolled up as tightly as possible. It was then placed in this press, which is sketched in the old pamphlet here. Imagine this handle being opened up, the roll being placed over that post, the handle coming back down, and then to make the roll shorter. Now, after opening it up, you would find that this first step sufficed to put small ridges in the paper, shrinking it down a bit in one direction. That's not crepe paper yet, but you can see where this is going. They restacked it between those corrugated sheets, rolled it up, squeezed it again, this time at a different angle. And they did it again and again and again and again, each time with the book pages at a different angle, and the result is this. What looks like fabric is actually paper that has been squeezed and compressed again and again and again at different angles, resulting in the soft, patterned, beautifully flexible sheets that we see in these books. The batch of finished sheets were then folded, trimmed in the usual way to make up the completed books. Now that's a basic overview, but if, for example, you were trying to think about how to do it yourself, the key part of the process is missing. What was the shape, form, and structure of those corrugated sheets? Now they would be squeezed and expanded during the procedure, transferring their shape to the paper, and they would have to do it time and time again under heavy pressure. They would need to be extremely strong, yet completely flexible. Now the German researchers must have been thinking the same thing, how that these were made. You look at the report, because we read this phrase in their report. Where am I? Here. We were told in answer to our inquiries concerning the manufacture of these sheets that it was a trade secret. But these men, they were nothing if not persistent in their research. They go on to describe how they asked if we could maybe get some stuff that was being thrown away before you discard it, and they were apparently allowed to do so because they mentioned taking some of these sheets away for chemical and microscopic examinations. They literally took some sheets apart, discovering much about their basic structure and components. And then they returned to the workshop with these pieces and their interpreter again and showed the guy in the workshop. And this time, the reply was different. The answer, reduced to one sentence, was that it was useless to hide anything any longer from the sensei. And they were then shown into the back room where the process was explained to them, how the sheets were made from multiple layers of thin paper glued onto a special grooved wooden form and put persimmon juice on top to give them the required strength and flexibility. They included all this information in their final report, and we thus now have on paper an explication of how these beautiful books came into existence. Now you're thinking, I guess, what I'm thinking, could we actually produce a book like this here in our workshop? I don't mean a copy of one of these old ones. So I mean something new, something interesting. I don't know. I know it comes down to a question of allocation of resources and costs, and of course, prices. Any given page of such a book, let's just find a page. Look at this, look at this, look at this. Any given page is a full color woodblock print. I need to pay the carver to make a complete set of blocks. The printer, of course, needs to be paid for each sheet. The washi costs, the sizing. And this is not simple printing by any means. Anytime you see a spread like this, look at this, with the image running across left and right, please understand that these are two separate woodblock prints. I explained this in a previous David's Choice video where I showed how some old novels were made. Remember, I took a book apart to show one set of wood blocks for the left spread and another for the right spread. But this is far more difficult. This is not junk level one color black printing. The color tints and tones, the depth of the gradations, they have to match from one side to the other. And this is all before it goes through the squeezing process. During that part of it, the dimensions of the paper are reduced to about 60 or 70% of the original size. One or two extra by the craftsman, and one side would be smaller than the neighboring side. How much time, money per sheet, how many spoiled copies, and then on top of everything else, once the stack of crepe sheets are ready, you still have to do all the book binding. To produce something like this now would need a stunning amount of investment to research all the procedure, build the jigs and tools, train some people to do all the jobs, and get it set up before even making one page. And even once we were up and running, there is still so much labor involved at every stage that the basic production costs for a simple little book like this would result in a final price of many, many, many hundreds of dollars per volume. Actually, having said that, I can hear you right now shouting at your screen. Even from where I'm sitting, I can hear you. Kickstarter! Kickstarter! And yeah, I say, of course it could be done. I could set up a killer Kickstarter campaign, showing close-ups of these books and explaining how we would recreate the old technology. But we've actually already got wonderful crowdsourced support from members of our Patreon. They're providing funds to us, and I'm sure if I told them I would like to divert some of that money to work on something like this, they would enthusiastically approve. It's not so much about the money. It's basically a question of human resources. I just don't have the people here to take this on. Not for the development, not for printing the things, even assuming we could all get it up and running. as those of you who are sitting on one of our long waiting lists, the waiting list for the Great Wave, for the Japan Journey series, the Octopus, the Scent of Chrysanthemums, as all the waiting people can testify, we here at Mokuhankan are stretched to the limit on our ability to get prints out the door. Believe me, I would love to do this. I actually had some discussion about these books with a program planner from NHK, that's the national TV broadcaster, a couple of years back. He knew about Hasegawa-san's publications and wanted to work together with us to plan a special 1-hour program about them. We would talk about the history, introduce the beautiful books, of course, and then, this is why he'd come to me, we would make a brand new one from scratch. Now, I didn't turn him down flat, but I basically told him the same things that I've just told you. And that's where it sits. The idea is just sitting there on the table. So there we are. I'm very happy to have been able to introduce these beautiful books to those of you who have never seen them before. And now, if you have seen the most recent couple of these David's Choice videos, you know what is coming next. It's time for me to stop talking about these books. It's time to look at some up close. Now, Cameron and I have prepared some slow video and images so you can get a good view of some of Hasegawa-san's best work, including a very special item that I haven't shown you yet tonight. Everybody who sees and holds these books at first hand completely falls in love with them. I'm sorry that you can't reach through your screen and touch this one, but we'll try and get the closest experience for you that we can manage. And then one day, if we here at Mokuhankan can indeed get our little collection, reading room, whatever we're going to call it, if we actually get that organized in the unused space up on the second floor, then you can come for a visit and get a better view. Until that happens, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. And now please sit back and enjoy a few of these little books. Good night for now. Now, this old book that we picked up at auction a while ago is a bit of a trick. It looks like an old French book, Tales of Old Japan, Book 1. But when we open it up, we find that it's not a book actually, it's a case. And here we have some more of the fairy tale books. These are French editions. The first one, Momotaro the Peach Boy, the famous story. All in all, Hasegawa published 20 of these fairy tale books in French, and this book contains 11 of them. I presume there's another book, Book 2, with perhaps 9 more. We weren't lucky enough to find that one. Now here are some of the books from inside the set. There's 11 in all, but here's just a few of them. This is the famous old story, The Wedding of the Mice. It's Nezumi no Yome Iri. Here it is in Japanese. Now the set we have here is from around the earliest time of when these books were made, and the craftsmanship is wonderful. The carving is just incredibly delicate. Even with the paper being shrunk down as much as it has, it's still completely clear. Every whisker is visible. Every word is readable. And the book as a whole, it's so light to hold. Let's check the date. It's on the back page. We can see exactly when this was made. This is dated Meiji 28. That's 1895, early on in the span of time that these books were being made. Now we can compare, because as it happens, I've got a later version of this exact same book, the English version, The Mouse's Wedding. Checking the date, this is much later. This is Showa 10, 1936. And look at the difference between these two. The level of craftsmanship is totally different. If the newer one was the only one you had, you would still think it was wonderful. But having the old one available for comparison, we can see the degradation over the years. And look at this one more place. If we turn this book sideways, we can compare the level of shrinking that the creping process brought to each sheet. Let's find one. Look at this one. Look at this. The lower page has shrunk that far, and the other page is much wider. The craftsman hasn't put quite so much pressure on his machine, and it hasn't shrunk to match. Over decades, they've really lost their touch quite a bit. But even so, they're so magnificent. If this was the only one you could see, you would still find it stunning. They're such a pleasure to hold. Just indescribable pleasure. Now, because we have multiple copies of these, again, French here compared with English on the left, we can make wonderful comparisons. It turns out these two books are printed from completely different blocks. The pattern here is different. And up here, flowers? No flowers. Over the years, they published so many copies of these books that are a matter of course the publisher would have the blocks recarved, and with no requirement to maintain exactly the same details each time.